Hello everybody, SlimKirby here, and I'm going on a long journey of trying to complete every single Game Boy Advance game in North America. This is the story of the highs, the lows, and all the silly stuff in between for the Game Boy Advance completion experience. This is GB Ace.
Show me tech!
Game number 19, Tak and the Power of Juju. Well, how about that? We got another license game. Well, kinda. I'm sure there are some people out there who are ready to say, oh wow, another game based off of a TV show, how original. But the reality is, Tak and the Power of Juju did not start as a Nickelodeon cartoon show. No, this is an IP that actually started as a video game first. First released in 2003 on the GameCube, PS2, and Game Boy Advance. 4 years before the TV show even debuted. The game was published by THQ and developed by Avalanche Software, although the GBA version was actually developed by Helix specifically. Once again, the case where the portable version was licensed off to another company. However, even though this came out almost a half-decade before the TV show, apparently Nickelodeon still had some producer rights to this IP. So I guess a show was kind of in the works anyway? It did confuse me though when I saw a Nick Games credit during the opening intro and had to do some personal research after the fact. Anyway, going into this game, I personally had no experience with this franchise. I had heard about it, as I was generally well informed and familiar with games that came out around that time, but it was never really a title that piqued my interest, I guess you could say. Let's just say some other games and franchises kind of had a stronger hold of me at that point. However, the game and the franchise has had some personal recency relevance with one of my friend circles, as my good friend Snack Attack 8, seen here frolicking at a children's playground while wearing a flower crown, actually took up speedrunning the console version of this game for one of the Stack Game Marathon events I participated in. Anyway, I decided to let Snack give a very brief analysis and review of Tak for the purpose of this summary, just because he has a little more to say about this IP than I do. So, take it away, Snacky boy.
I'll take any opportunity I can get to sing the praises of Tak, so I appreciate the platform, Slim. I actually grew up with the console version of this game, along with its 2 sequels on the GameCube. And while my journey to becoming a Tak superfan speedrunner was certainly fueled by a healthy dose of irony poisoning, I actually do have a bit of a genuine fondness for Tak. The series is a bit all over the place. It's always cramming new stuff in and reinventing its gameplay and structure with each installment, though I guess that wasn't particularly uncommon for 3D platformers in this era in general. The original game, which is the one I like the most, is your classic collectathon type beat. It's got a big interconnected overworld, plenty of little trinkets and stuff to find, pretty akin to something like Jak and Daxter. But then the sequels are entirely linear, with a bigger emphasis placed on platforming and combat, I guess. The third game can even be played completely in 2-player co-op, and honestly, it's pretty fun. The only real consistency in the series comes from the visual aesthetics and the core cast of wacky cartoon characters, both of which I kinda dig overall. I actually think Tak puts up a pretty strong showing graphically when comparing it to its contemporaries in the sort of 6th gen middle tier space, and I especially like the art design for the environments. It's quite nice. While, yes, these games definitely lean on immature, gross-out humor fairly often, I think the Tak series is at the very least kind of funny sometimes, and the honestly stacked cast of accomplished cartoon voice actors goes a long way in making the world endearing. You can definitely tell Nickelodeon threw a little money at this franchise, and for my money, you could do a lot worse than Tak, especially if you're a platformer lover like myself. Check it out.
Wow, well, thanks for the expert analysis there, Snack. It was really nice to hear.
Plus, it's genuinely a sick speed game. Item storage, infinite hovering, invisible walls and clips all over the place. Come on. Also, before I get kicked out of here, I just want to do a little shout out to Flora, love of my life, best girl forever. I would do anything for her.
Yeah, I hear you on that. But anyway, like I was saying, yep, thanks for coming out. Thanks for your insights. And I'll have to catch up with you again later.
Thanks for having me on to discuss Tak, Slim. I don't know how I never thought to check out the handheld versions of all these games, but I'm absolutely gonna have to hit up some TAC GBA myself sometime soon.
Yes, you really should. You should definitely give it a try. I think you'd be doing yourself a huge...
By the way, Slim, what's your favorite thing about TAC? I think mine is his noble spirit. I also like that he says boom shakalaka.
Yes, TAC is good. It's all good. Great series. Love it. Thank you, Snack. Talk to you later. Let's get back to the review. Man, I forgot how much he gabs on about TAC. Anyway, let's get down to business. The completion goal for this game is actually really simple. We have to beat the game and draw the credits. That's it. No difficulty modes, no true endings, no extra bonus games or features, and although there is technically a 100% stipulation, well, let's just say it's not even going to matter by the end of this, but I'll explain why later. So yeah, very simple completion here, so this really shouldn't be too bad for us. As far as the plot is concerned for this game, basically there exists a jungle warrior tribe known as the Pupunanu, whose guardian, the moon Juju spirit, proclaims that the people of this tribe will face grave danger from and be heavily weakened by an evil shaman named Thalok. Thalok was once part of the Pupunuauan tribe, but is holding a grudge because he was not selected as High Shaman by the people, whom they selected another in the form of Jabulba. As a result, Thalok casts a spell which in turn turns all, or almost all, of the entire tribe into sheep. Jabulba manages to escape this spell, along with another fortunate soul, his apprentice, a young warrior named Tak. So now, Tak must go out and find Locke, the mighty Pupunauan warrior of the prophecy, who is destined to save all the tribe's people from this evil Juju magic. There's also another girl that also doesn't get affected by this spell named Flora, and I don't really know what she's supposed to be, but she does go around teaching Tak the basics of this game. I kind of thought she would be like a love interest or something, but the wiki did not confirm that, so don't really know who she is or why she's here, but either way, she's here to help us along the way, and that's pretty cool. Tak and the Power of Juju is a 2D platformer, or rather this version of the game is anyway. The console version is actually a 3D platformer, but as you might expect, since that would be incredibly difficult to manage on a handheld system, they had to go a more simplistic route for the gameplay here. A route that makes the game emphasize more of a linear progression on stage completion, with less of a focal point on the item collecting. The gameplay for Tak is incredibly straightforward. You can move, you can jump, and you can attack. That's it really, so not really a lot we have to explain here. Tak's form of attacking involves using a blowgun, which means he will pretty much be doing all of his combat from a distance, at least at first. Eventually though, he'll be given a hand-to-hand weapon which is way more accurate and powerful, and you'll likely find yourself never using the blowgun again unless you absolutely have to, but more on that later. As far as the general movement and control, honestly this game feels pretty good. It's not entirely perfect, not by any stretch, but probably the best feeling 2D platformer I've done for this challenge, aside from Super Mario Advance of course. Honestly, the biggest issue I had with controlling this game had less to do with the control itself, and more with the general hitboxes of the enemies and obstacles. There will be moments where you try to jump over something, like a small bramble bush for example, just to barely clip the top of it and take damage in the process. I wouldn't say this really distracts from the whole game though, but it is definitely something I did notice at a few certain points. On the subject of damage, Tak starts the game with only 3 health, meaning you have 2 extra hits before taking a death. You can collect feathers to restore your health, and if you manage to find a gold feather, this will permanently extend your health an additional unit as well. So if anything, you could almost make the argument that the early game is tougher than the mid and late game, at least in terms of survivability. However, with that being said, I wouldn't say it's really that hard, just something you'll have to manage as you play through your adventure. As far as stage progression, all you have to do is simply make it to the end of the level, and that's really about it. Along the way, you will find sheep stranded across each stage, symbolizing all of your tribe's people affected by Thalok's magic, and if you collect them, the game will keep track of how many you have gotten in the top right corner for each level. You could look at the sheep as this game's 100% requirement, as they are definitely not required for game completion, but I'll talk more about the reward for doing this later, so stay tuned for that. For the purposes of this challenge, I do not have to get 100% in this game, but at least for the time being, I do try to see how far I can get with a sheep percent run of the game. Our journey begins in World 1, the Jungle World. It's a relatively easy section of the game with not much platforming involved, aside from just making a few jumps here and there while also dealing with enemies. At this point in the game, you only have your blowgun to work with, which, while effective, is not very powerful and in some cases can't even destroy certain enemies, only stun them. However, for those enemies, you can also shoot nearby beehives to send bees that will finish the job for you. It was a little cumbersome using the blowgun to aim at certain enemies and obstacles, mainly due to the elevation more than anything. But to the game's credit, I didn't know you could use the R button to aim it manually, something I didn't even realize until I had already completed the game for this challenge. Whoops. Also, in certain levels of the game, you will find a cool little rhino buddy that will charge through a nice line of enemies for you and clear a path, in case you need to backtrack for a sheep or power-up or something. These little sections are very brief and don't really amount to anything, but I figured I should at least point them out. Halfway through World 1, we do manage to locate Locke, or at the very least, a sheep that is wearing his medallion. Well, our warrior of the prophecy is down for the count. That's not good. Jabulba states that he can turn him back to normal, but we have to collect some healing herbs for him first. So for the rest of the world, in addition to collecting sheep, we also need to collect this grass. Now, the grass itself wasn't too hard to find. Most of it is directly in your path anyway, and Jabulba does try to highlight it for you so you can see it more easily, so I didn't end up missing any. But I also don't know for sure if you do need to collect all of it either. You have 4 different levels to collect it from, and you can't exactly backtrack to previous levels either. So I just didn't bother finishing any levels until I was sure I was good. I collected every available piece of grass along with every sheep in World 1, completing the jungle world with a perfect score. We turned the sheep we found back into a human and are surprised to learn that, hey, this isn't Locke. This is just one of his understudies. Well, what happened to the real Locke? Oh, he got crushed at a temple and may no longer be living? Well, that sucks. Or actually, maybe not completely. It seems like Jabulba has the power of resurrection, so while he goes to the temple to help Locke and observe the situation, we must head to the tree village and procure a weapon called the Spirit Rattle. So, let's get to work on that. World 2 is a bit more difficult than World 1, but not by much as you might expect. The platforming gets a bit more intricate, but nothing you shouldn't be able to handle. Although there are a few sections where if you fall, you may have to redo a bit of progress. I wouldn't worry too much though, because if you are worried about falling too much while platforming, this game actually doesn't have any bottomless pits or one-hit KO obstacles. You may land on an enemy or obstacle that does damage that you won't be able to see, but that's about as harsh as it gets. So the game is honestly pretty forgiving in that department. In fact, the harshest thing the game can do to you is if you take a death, you unfortunately do have to restart the entire stage over again. And any collectibles you got, like sheep or life extenders, will reset as well, meaning you will have to get them over again. But while that was annoying for a game like Kong, a game we played earlier in the challenge that had the same quirk, it honestly didn't bother me as much here because the game was just overall more forgiving anyway, which just made the adventure even more chill for me. After beating the first level of World 2, we pick up Tak's other main attacking weapon, the Spirit Rattle. I found this easily more useful than the blowgun personally, as even though the latter allowed you to attack from a distance, this just felt more reliable and consistent for me, and kept the pacing of the game moving forward as I didn't have to stop and aim so much. Its range isn't that great, but it allowed me to have more reasonable reaction times, and actually was capable of dealing damage to enemies that couldn't be hurt before. So yeah, it felt like an improvement to me. Before I knew it, World 2 was finished, and we completed another world with a full sheep collection. And yeah, sheep percent was still good to go. Overall, while the world was slightly more difficult, the fact that I was gaining more health and just experience with the game definitely kept the adventure moving forward in a good direction for me. Heck, I even died at the very end of 2 different levels, pretty much when I was en route to having all the sheep as well. And even those incidents didn't really deter me that much, even if it meant I had to redo those entire levels all over again. Really a good feeling when you can just sit back and enjoy a game like that. Back to the plot, we show Jabulba that we have procured the spirit rattle, but things are not looking too good for Locke, unfortunately, meaning we have to pay a visit to the death Juju and have him give us Locke's spirit balloon. So, it's off to the burial grounds we go for world number 3. This world was pretty much more of the same. The first few levels start above ground, but about halfway through these stages, we actually head into a deep underground tunnel for the rest of the stages in this section. These levels actually had some pretty nice atmosphere, not gonna lie, although there was one very unfortunate thing that happened here at the end of 3.5. I reached the very end of this level when I realized I only had 11 of the 12 sheep I needed. However, to get to this point, I had to jump down a giant pit, which had no way of returning from, meaning this was a point of no return. Welp, there goes the sheep percent run. I know the sheep are optional and everything, but still, that is kinda lame that a 100% run can end just like that, especially since I did not have prior knowledge of the stage abruptly ending in that fashion. Plus, if you do want to try again, you'd either have to die, or in the case of this, where there was nothing more for me to take damage on, quit the game and restart this entire world from the very beginning, something I didn't really want to do. So I decided to press on despite this loss. I'll still try to go for all the sheep in the stages though, just to see how many I do get, but I'm not gonna make it a point to die or restart any level or section in the game just to try again. I think that's more than fair. We meet the Death Juju and acquire Locke's spirit balloon, which looks like a deflated baseball. And although Locke's condition can improve now, he's still in no shape to take on Thaylok, and Thaylok himself decides to pay a visit and knock on our door to taunt us in our current handicap. Now our objective is to obtain the 4 moonstones, which we can use to put a stop to the shaman's evil magic. Onward we go, I guess. World 4 is Chicken Island, and this world was interesting because it did introduce a new dynamic to the game in the form of animal transformations. Kinda like Donkey Kong Country when you think about it. This world brings us the chicken transformation, where Tak turns into the named poultry itself, and can fly around the stage and drop eggs on unsuspecting enemies, after collecting them from other chickens first, of course. Now, the flying controls are a little stiff, at least when flying horizontally, and the hitbox of the eggs is not exactly great either, as they need to land precisely on top of the enemy's hitbox, but overall it wasn't too terrible of a transformation. It's no squawks from Donkey Kong Country 2 or 3, but it's not like these levels or sections are too long anyway. After 4 levels, we find out that level 5 is a boss fight against Thaylok's henchmen, Pins and Needles. And yeah, this game has boss fights too. How about that? However, they are admittedly nothing special. In fact, all you do here is become the chicken and drop eggs on the 2 goons. It can be a little tricky avoiding the 2 clowns since the arena is pretty small and they both have separate means of attacking, but they don't take too many hits either, so if you focus hard on one, you can eliminate them and then single out the other one. Plus, you should have plenty of health for this too, so it's really not too bad. Once they go down, we acquire our first moonstone, and our Jigglypuff can now evolve into Wigglytuff. And we can now move on to the next world as well. World 5 is Numa Bay, and of course, all platforming games need to have a set of water stages, so let's get our snorkels on and try to brave the briny deep. Well, I wish it was that easy for Tak anyway, as unfortunately this is a game where he has a breathing meter when underwater, so he won't be able to last long without coming up for air. The controls themselves are fine, but be very careful if you plan to stay under for a long time, as once the meter runs out, you won't immediately die, but you'll take residual damage until you do, so don't be too lax here. I actually got lost at one point during this world when I was looking for sheep, and got stuck on a few of the cavern walls, which did lead me to taking an unfortunate death close to the end of a level. But hey, those are the breaks sometimes, I guess. Speaking of the sheep, they're all wearing snorkeling gear underwater, so what's Tack's excuse for not doing so? This world also introduces the second transformation of, brace yourselves, 2 transformations for this game. And here I thought there was going to be way more substance with this mechanic, but apparently not. Oh well. Anyway, this transformation is a fish, which basically removes the air meter underwater. You can also swim faster, naturally, and you do have a defense mechanism attack, which I was convinced didn't work at first when I tried it, but it does. Just a case of weird hitboxes being weird hitboxes. I will say though, on the subject of weird hitboxes, I had a hell of a time clearing this water level. You have to guide the fish transformation through some very tight corridors with spikes, while also being channeled through a current system, while also trying to avoid enemies as well. And it actually made this part a little annoying to get through. Honestly, it was probably my least favorite level of the game because of that quirk, and also just because I felt like I had very little control over my own character. Thankfully though, this world is just 3 levels and a boss fight, so it's not terribly long. Speaking of the boss fight, it's another rather simple exercise. You just need to hit these bombs with your rattle and propel them over to Pins and Needles' ship, while also avoiding their own onslaught. That's it really. After they go down, we get another Moonstone, allowing our Skitty to evolve into a Delcatty. And then we can move on to the next part of the game. World 6 is the Canyon World, and we immediately start by getting access to the final ability Tack will have in this game, in the form of some Juju power that gives the Spirit Rattle a long-range charge attack. Basically think of it as Mega Man's charged up Buster Shot, but with a close-range weapon instead. It's actually pretty cool and is a decent help in some cases, so don't be afraid to use it if you want to very quickly get rid of some enemies in front of you. This would probably be a decent boss killer as well, if the game utilized the bosses to a normal combat scenario in the first place, as that hasn't exactly been relevant so far in this game. So yeah, this world takes place in a mountainous region, so lots of platforming on rocky terrain, and wind gusts that will help carry you around certain areas. Pretty standard world that serves to check the boxes of a traditional 2D platforming trope. Although I feel like I gotta say that I ran into a pretty huge game-breaking bug in this world as well. You see, at a certain point in the first stage, and a few of the other levels moving forward, you will come across a ram who is just chilling out in front of a giant boulder slab that is blocking your way forward. In order to get through this obstacle, you have to hit the ram on the backside with one of your projectile attacks to get it to charge forward and knock over the impediment in front of you. However, do not try to hit the ram from the front. If you try doing this, Tack will just lock up and you can't move, jump, or do anything meaningful except pause the game, forcing you to turn off your game or just exit gameplay from the start menu. Thankfully, this happened in the first level of this world, so I only had to redo that level to that point, but it's still a pretty weird and annoying bug that I'm surprised was even a thing in the first place. My guess is that the cutscene that would occur at that point wouldn't know what to do with Tack, since he would directly be in the way of the ram's hitbox, so it just locks the game completely, or something to that degree. Pretty weird bug, and probably the strangest one we've seen in GBA so far. Well, okay, maybe not the weirdest, but the weirdest that involved literal crashing. The boss of this world was rather interesting. Once again, it's not a straight-up skill showdown between Tack and the two goons, but rather we're trying to pop a giant air balloon by throwing some bombs into a few obvious weak points, while Pins and Needles fire their own projectiles at us in the process. Not too hard or complicated, and since we have so much health now, I never really felt in danger either, so it was a pretty free fight for me. Another Moonstone acquired, which means our Nidorino can finally become a Nidoking. With only one more Moonstone to go, we head into the next world, which is the Sun Temple. Now, this world was actually pretty beefy, featuring 5 full-length levels and then the boss fight. Not to mention, I feel like the developers intended for the player to approach this world with a much slower mindset. You see, this being the Sun Temple, it's naturally pretty hot in here, so much in the same vein as the underwater drowning mechanic, we have something similar in the form of a temperature meter. When the temperature reaches its climax, Tak needs to find some shade, otherwise he will take residual damage from the heat, and you will not be having a good time as a result. Honestly, this mechanic is probably not as intrusive as you might fear, as I found myself actually kind of forgetting about it during a few of the levels, just because I was reaching the shade pretty quickly and easily anyway, and my pacing was never really affected by it that much. Honestly, if your pace was going to be broken by anything, it would probably be looking for all the damn sheep in this world. I swear, there were some sheep I just could not find for the life of me, and trust me, I looked pretty hard in a decent majority of the levels. It ultimately got to a point where I just was no longer interested in finding them, and just kind of moved on, only grabbing them if they were directly in my path. The boss fight for this world was, well, it was definitely a boss fight to remember, I'll say that much. It was actually more of a Dance Dance Revolution simulator, and a pretty basic one at that. Think of it as the Banana Bird Caves in Donkey Kong Country 3, where it's more like Simon, just memorizing sequences and repeating them until the boss is over. Once again, pretty simple, but also really silly too. We get our last Moonstone, evolving our beautiful Nidorina into a gorgeous Nidoqueen. And then we make our way back to Jabulba and Locke for another debriefing. Things are still not looking so great for Locke though. When it seems like he is finally ready for action, a sudden stomach pain befalls Locke, and once again, our warrior hero cannot be depended on. It's at this point that the Moon Juju finally makes her appearance to make the proclamation that we pretty much know all along. Locke is actually not the hero to stop Thalok. No. It was actually Tak this entire time. So yeah, let's move forward and put an end to this shaman's evil ways, because now we're the hero of the prophecy. Thalok's castle is actually the last world of the game, and is pretty much a comprehensive review of all the types of gameplay we've done and seen up to this point. To be honest, I actually don't remember too much about this world, as it kind of blended together with the last one a little bit, if I'm being honest. I think the fact that I had nearly max health and was pretty much out of the sheep percentage mentality at this point, it just put me on a nice leisurely trek towards the end, and honestly I was kind of fine with that. Eventually I made it to the last level and the final encounter with Thalok himself. This fight was, once again, pretty easy. Very basic boss pattern recognition with only 2 phases, and it's nothing that you shouldn't be able to handle. In fact, I was able to first try this boss without too many issues. I did take a lot of damage, and I also survived on my final hit, but most of that was because Thalok always seemed to catch me off guard with some of his very quick counterattacks after he was hit by one of mine, which seemed to be the most unpredictable strikes in this fight to begin with. After winning the battle, we put Thalok away for good by turning him into a ghost? Damn, did we just kill him just like that? Yeah, heck, during the credits we even see him just floating around in his ghostly form. I mean, I suppose there's no real stakes in this world when it comes to living though, considering shaman magic can just resurrect people anyway, but still. Can't say I was expecting that. Oh well. Game complete, everybody. So, that was Tak and the Power of Juju for the Game Boy Advance. And honestly, it was pretty good. It's definitely not the most amazing platformer in the world, and I wouldn't say it's an all-time superstar of the GBA library or anything, but it played and controlled well, and I was thoroughly engaged through my playthrough of it. I think if I had to nitpick something, maybe the game was a bit too easy, and the boss fights were not really anything special. Honestly, the hardest part of the game is probably just getting started, because you only have 3 hits before death, and you might struggle a bit while you're still learning the controls and mechanics in the process. By the end game though, you can take up close to 10 hits, and even if it's technically harder by then, it's not like a death is super punishing either. Plus, I found myself with close to 50 lives near the end of the game anyway, so was not really fearing any game overs or anything like that. I guess that one water level was also really annoying too, but just 1 level out of 30 is really not too bad. My biggest disappointment would have to be the sheep collecting though. Not because it was annoying or anything, but because it was ultimately and completely pointless. That's right, you don't get anything for collecting all the sheep in this game. And trust me, I did check the internet to verify this. No bonus modes, no extra options, not even an Isle Delfino postcard. It was quite literally an irrelevant game mechanic for the entire run, and that's honestly a shame. I mean, probably for the best since the game has points of no return and doesn't really offer any level select feature either, so a run could be very easy to lose anyway. But still, it's a shame that it just amounts to nothing though. I think the reason for this is just because the development team was rushed to make this game to release it alongside the console versions, and as a result, they didn't have enough time to flesh out the idea. Therefore, they just scrapped the idea entirely with no payoff. Everything else, though, was honestly fine and completely inoffensive in the worst possible case, so I still think this game deserves a W overall. It's also another game that is giving me that feeling of console yearn, but definitely the positive side of it, like Doom for example. I think it helps that the console versions of this game are 3D platformers, so I'm a little more curious to see how those versions work and how this game adapted from that game style to a more simplified 2D platformer. Plus, I have friends who know a little more about that game and have given me good impressions of it, so definitely more to look forward to. Did it give me an interest in the Tak TV show though? Not really. Still interesting considering its history of how it came to be, but not something I'm super vested in. I think I'll mostly just stick with the video games here, especially since we have 2 more Tak games on this system anyway, so we'll have those to look forward to at least. For overall game quality and review, I'm going to give Tak and the Power of Juju on the GBA a 3.5 out of 5. Better than average, but nothing amazing. For personal enjoyability, I did increase this up to a 4 out of 5, just because I did have a lot of fun streaming this, and it was a relatively quick and easy game to clear and gave me a little more interest in other games of the series. In fact, I think some of my favorite moments during the stream playthrough were actually whenever I reacted to getting an extra life token, or as I called them, golden tacks. I was taking a risk by doing it. Yo, I got a golden tack! Yo, a golden tack! No, a golden tack! Ah! Yo, a golden tack! A golden tack! A golden tack! A golden tack! A golden tack? I don't know, I just had a lot of fun with it, and it got me something to look forward to whenever I was exploring the levels, especially when I couldn't really find the sheep as easily. And lastly, for difficulty, it's a 1.5 out of 5. It may have a few weird spots here and there, but otherwise, it was a breeze. Remember, about 50 lives by the final boss. I was literally in no danger of getting the game over. So yeah, that's gonna do it for Tak. I hope you all enjoyed what I have shown to you. You're welcome, Sis. And I'll be sure to see you next time for another exciting installment of GB Ace. Before we end though, as always, here's a sneak preview of what we have next for this series. Okay guys, thank you for watching this summary, I really appreciate it. Don't forget to leave a comment and or like on the video, as those will really help me in these videos out. And stay tuned for future summaries of this series. If you also want to watch full playthroughs of these games for this challenge, check out the video description for a full playlist of everything that's been uploaded and exported so far. And if you're curious about what I'm playing right now for the challenge, be sure to stop by my Twitch channel to see what my current progress is. Just be warned, I'll be a lot further ahead of where we are for these summaries, so keep that in mind. This has been SlimKirby in the GBA series, and I'll talk to you fine people next time. Later, folks.